I wanted to put on earrings for this. I remember. Hold on. Turn my chair very gently. Oh shit, it's all the way in there, isn't it? Or is it over there? No, those are my guillotine earrings. I can't wear those. Oh, I think I see them. Yep. Shout out to Claire's for fucking up my ear piercings. Oh, this is it. This is the shot. Anyway, hello everyone, and welcome to the induction ceremony of a new trinket to my bookshelf. The trinket we have for today, the Lego Botanical Tiny Plant Set. It's a pincushion cactus. Isn't it so cute though? Right up there. I love it. Now that everything is right in the world, we can finally get into the book review for today's book. Today we are discussing Legendborn. It's upside down. Anyway, sorry. Today we are discussing Legendborn by Tracy Deonn, and this book is so good. And not only did I take notes, I'm extra uber prepared. Today we have a character map. I did that. Okay, anyway, before I get into like the actual nitty-gritty of this book, I'll give a spoiler-free summary. For the spoiler-free review of this book, we start with our main character, Bree Matthews. She is in the hospital after hearing that her mother died in a car accident. And we get one of the most powerful prologues I think I've ever read in my life. I was listening to the audiobook. I didn't have the book in my hand when I started, but I was listening to the audiobook and I literally had to pause. There's many times where I had to just like pause and just like marinate in the words that this woman decided to write in this book, and it was a wonderful experience. The story starts with Bree Matthews. She's going to an early college program, which is being held at the University of South Carolina. No, it's North. Oh my God. I'm not helping my reputation of not knowing directions. So she's going to an early college program, which is essentially, they go as high school students. So they're all like 16 through 18, but they're taking college courses. They are supposed to feed into that college after they graduate high school. So she goes to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and she's taking these early college classes with her best friend, Alice, and the story follows them as they start to uncover, well, maybe not they, Bree starts to uncover some secret societies that are roaming right under the nose of the University of North Carolina. Bree meets a lot of new people. She has a tutor, and the story just follows her as she's really dealing with her grief as well as trying to discover herself as a person and how she fits in with these secret societies. It's very interesting, and I will preface that it's a long book, but you need to read every single word of it. It's 100% worth the read. I know I'm giving my review early, but still, that's the spoiler-free section. We're getting into spoilers now. So when I was coming up with this character map and who I wanted to represent each person, I really tried to be like genuine at first. I was like, okay, like logistically, which actors and actresses fit their age groups and fit their descriptions. And as I went on, I just got kind of goofy, silly. So for example, this is who I put for Bree. So she actually plays Annabeth in the Lightning Thief series. And logistically, like once this TV show comes out for Legendborn, because it is getting turned into a TV show, I think she would fit A, the age range, and B, the description. And then we get, I don't know what in my mind, I was like, the dad's animated. So the story opens and it's Bree, Alice, Charlotte, and then later Charlotte's boyfriend. They all go to this party at the quarry that is by the campus. It's like this tradition where all the freshmen are supposed to jump off like a cliff into some body of water. So they go to this party, which they're technically not supposed to be allowed at. Alice is super panicky the whole time. She's like, I don't want to break any rules. And Bree's like, cool, whatever, like let's just live it up, right? Bree is going through it. Bree has just lost her mother who used to also go to this school, and vehemently did not want Bree to apply for this early college program. So Bree is really going through it. She's not in a good mental state of mind. Bree is making some bad choices. They meet up with Charlotte and Charlotte's boyfriend, Evan, who they think is just a Chad. He's just Chad at this point, right? Alice, Charlotte, and Evan end up splitting off from Bree because Evan brought up the fact that Bree's mom died and made it really uncomfortable to the fact where Bree's like, I'm actually going to lose it. I need a minute to myself. And Alice is like, okay, just take a minute. Because Bree has this like alter ego, if you will, that she calls After Bree, which is like all this anger, anguish, grief manifested inside her that kind of like pushes out, and she has to essentially put a wall up inside her to keep this like anger from coming out. So she constantly refers to this manifestation of her anger and negative emotions, if you will, as After Bree. So she's like, I need to take a minute, otherwise After Bree is about to punch you in your face, Evan. So Bree is watching the other freshmen jump into this little lake, if you will, and she kind of like walks off into the woods to another part of the quarry that also has a cliff. And there's a moment where you almost feel like Bree's literally about to jump off of a cliff. Before she does that, she's met with a mysterious boy that comes from the forest and he just kind of like shows up, and he's super mysterious, but he's also like super like he's very hypnotizing, if you will. So this boy is someone who we later learn is Selwyn Kane, but he goes by Sel. So he's talking to Bree and he's like, it looks like you're about to just jump off this cliff. And she's like, no, I wasn't. Who are you? And he's being like super weird and super sus to her. Like they're making eye contact and they like feel something. And at first you're like, oh my God, it's just like weird romantic tension. This mysterious boy who she literally describes as the most beautiful person she's ever seen. Genuinely very beautiful, very attractive, objectively. Like the sky is blue, water is wet, Selwyn Kane is attractive. It's just one of the natural laws of this earth. But then Selwyn something else catches his attention and he's like, okay, I gotta go. Anyway, Bree ends up going back with Charlotte, Alice, and Evan to this little opening where I guess they're having like drinks and there's like a bonfire and whatever. But while she's there, she notices that these dudes, these like frat bros, are fighting each other. And while they're fighting each other, she sees something like glowing above their heads. And she's like, what the hell is that? She's not the only one that notices it. On the other side of this bonfire and the other side of this fight, she sees Selwyn looking at her. And she's like, we definitely both see this thing. Bree suddenly feels the sensation overtake her, where she feels like she has to leave this area of the forest. So she, along with everyone else that was there, suddenly gets up and they start leaving. And she says like she feels like something in her voice that's just like, leave, don't go. Once she gets closer towards like the parking lot, she suddenly snaps out of it. I forget how. I think she trips on something or she hits something, but something snaps her out of this instinct to leave this forest area. And she's like, oh my God, wait, I have to find Alice. She must be freaking out right now. So she runs back. But when she gets back there, she sees this like creature come out of this glowing ball nest thingy. So she sees this creature, but not only does she see that, she sees Selwyn and some other girl named Tor. So Selwyn and Tor, I think it might have just been Tor, take down this little creature thing. But before they do so, Selwyn starts to question it. And he's like, okay, why are you here? You're far from campus. Why are you so far from your gate? And he's like, you think that that's my gate? And Bree's like, what the hell am I watching right now? What is going on? She sees this creature. It's glowing. She sees these two supposedly high school age people fighting said creature. It's weird. It's weird. Eventually, Selwyn and Tor, they get rid of the creature and then they're like, okay, we need to go on a hunt. And Bree is freaked out because she's like, if they figure out that I saw them do this, they're going to hunt me too. So she runs from the forest. She bursts out onto the parking lot. And who is in that parking lot? Alice, Evan, Charlotte, and a police officer. They are busted for being in the quarry. But who does the police take? Alice and Bree only. They let Charlotte and Evan go. Why? Fuck. That's all I'm gonna say. This is all I'm gonna say to that man. So the police officer ends up taking Alice and Bree home without necessarily writing them up or getting them arrested, giving them any tickets or anything. During this ride home, Bree is answering the man's questions and he specifically points out that she's being very argumentative and very rude. Almost like there's a certain stereotype following Black women that maybe people perceive them as being more angry and rude than they actually are. And even if she was being angry and rude to him, he picked her up and not Charlotte and Evan, who are what I also wanted to bring up about this part is that sometimes throughout the book, I felt as though Bree was kind of stating the obvious. When she's getting picked up by the police officer, she makes it explicit to the reader that he is singling her out because she's Black. And I knew that immediately without her needing to tell me that. And what is really important when reading stories by people of color is that sometimes, especially in a white dominated field like publishing, it's really hard for certain readers to pick up on these things that other people of color specifically, understand immediately. So someone who does not identify as a person of color might read that section and not understand why Bree is so angry at this cop or why he's treating her and Alice a specific way. Whereas other people with similar experiences or similar backgrounds immediately know this. And we don't necessarily need it said. Specifically, this police officer brings up the fact that his son tried to apply for the early college program at the University of North Carolina, but he didn't get in. And he implies very heavily that Alice and Bree got in because of affirmative action, which in our great day and age of 2024 is no longer a thing. Thank you. Again, I got that all through subtext, but Bree also mentions that explicitly. And me as the reader, I was like, well, why did you need to tell me that? Of course I understood that. But again, because while I immediately understood that the officer was implying they only got in because of affirmative action, someone else might not. Getting back to the story, we're only on chapter 3 and there's 50 chapters. So Alice and Bree are called to the dean's office the next day. Alice is very mad at Bree because they got in trouble on the very first day that they were there. So they get called into the dean's office and the dean is being very incredibly rude to Bree. So the dean decides not to expel them and not to necessarily like get them in any kind of trouble, but because of their quote unquote delinquency, he pairs them up with peer mentors in the year above them. So when they get back to their dorm, Alice and Bree have a massive fight because Alice is like, you almost got me in trouble. I could have gotten kicked out of this program just because you don't care about this and because you're going through it with your grief or whatever doesn't mean that you need to drag me into it. Like Alice is really doing some low blows right now. Obviously her best friend just lost her mother. She's going through it. She may not be making some good decisions. We can have a little bit of sympathy. Later on, Bree's dad calls her up. The dean has not called their parents yet, so he doesn't know what Bree has done yet. So he calls her and he's just like, hey, what's going on? How's early college? What are you doing? She has like a lot of things on her mind while she's on this phone call with her dad because again, she just saw like something super weird last night. Is pretty sure no one else saw it and no one else would believe her if she tried to talk about it. During this chapter, Bree has something similar to like an anxiety attack, like a panic attack, because she realizes that that same sensation she had in the woods where she was feeling like an unknown force pulling her out of the woods and snapping out of it, she had that same feeling the night her mother died, and she realizes that some of her memories were altered from that night with probably the same magic that forced her away from the forest. And she's like, okay, something weird is going on at the school. They have magic. I need to find out what's going on. Bree meets her peer mentor, Nick, who's been trying to get a hold of her all day. Nick is in the year above her. She has just gone back from dinner. They're kind of like talking, chatting. He's being super friendly, super charming, super, you know, he's trying to like be friends with her. Suddenly she sees, ooh, I just dropped that. She sees something going on from the corner of her eye and she recognizes it as the same kind of like weird magical glow of light that she saw that night in the quarry. So she runs after it. Lo and behold, it's not just like the cute little tiny creature that Selwyn and Tor fought. No, it's a hell demon. It's a hellhound. That's what it's called, actually. The hellhound attacks her. But then who comes in to save the day? Nick Davis, her peer mentor. He comes out with a little sword and he's like, whoosh, whoosh, and he kills the hellhound. Bree is injured very badly in this attack. Nick takes her back to his lodge where she is healed by who we later find out is William. And she is healed specifically using ether. More on that later. When Bree wakes up in this little infirmary in the lodge, she tries to like question Nick, but she really doesn't know what she's talking about. So she is throwing out buzzwords like left and right, trying to get a reaction out of Nick. And he thinks that like she actually kind of like knows what she's talking about. But then very quickly, he's like, you actually don't know what you're talking about. He's like, okay, we need to get you out of here. So they're talking for a little bit. And then he's like, oh no, someone is coming. And who is that someone? Selwyn Kane. So Sel is coming in to wipe her memories. Nick also finds out that Bree's memories were not wiped from that night that she was at the quarry and saw that thing. And he's like, you cannot let Sel know that his little memory wipe did not take. William and Nick are trying to stall Sel for a little bit, but eventually he comes barreling in. Bree has to try to pretend she's never seen this dude before in her life, and he ends up wiping her memories. So the next day, Bree wakes up in her dorm. Alice already angry at her. She's like, first, you got us almost arrested by the police. We have peer mentors now, and they called our parents to let us know what we did. And now you're getting drunk at frat parties? And Bree's like, whoa, what are you talking about? I was not at a frat party. And Alice is like, some dude literally dragged you in here. You were like all sorts of drunk. And Bree's like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And us as the reader figure out that Bree's memories have actually been wiped and she actually cannot remember what happened to her the previous night. What we find out is that before her memory got wiped, Bree bit the inside of her cheek so hard she started bleeding. The next day, when she's brushing her teeth, she hits that same spot in her cheek where she bit herself. Upon contacting that like pain, she remembered everything. So the mesmer, which is like the mind wiping thing, did not take hold because that like pain forced her to remember. Literally slay of the century. Now her memories are all recovered. She goes to find Nick because she knows that he knows something about the Legendborn, which she has that word in her vocabulary. Does she know what it means? No. She infiltrates one of his classes, one of his biology classes, and she tries to question him about like what he knows and like what happened that night. She tells him she remembers everything. She's so cool about it because she's like, you should tell Selwyn to get his mesmers correct if he's going to try and wipe my memory. And he's like, how are you doing that? So he's trying to like avoid her for like a really long time. She's like not letting it go, not even remotely trying to let it go. She looks up all the secret societies that were present at the University of North Carolina. She finds a few, but she only finds one that is supposedly based off a legend. It's the Round Table. So she figures out that they probably meet in this lodge that's off campus. She goes there after classes. So she goes into this lodge. She knocks on the door, right? And who answers the door? Sarah. Do we know who Sarah is yet? No, but I know who Sarah is now. So Sarah answers the door and Bree's like, hey, Nick told me to meet him here. Is it okay if I wait inside? And she's like, yeah, I definitely know why you're here. Cool. Bree manages to sneak into this secret society, no questions asked. Might I suggest, if you're gonna have a secret society, make it a little more secret. Sarah is super nice. She eventually calls Nick and Nick comes within like 10 minutes. Homeboy's sprinting to this lodge, right? Nick bursts into the lodge. He's like, what are you doing here? You need to leave immediately. And she's like, no, absolutely, I'm not. I need to figure out what it is that you guys are doing. And Bree ends up telling Nick that she thinks that she was mesmerized the night that her mother died. She doesn't know why, and she has a sneaking suspicion that someone within the society had something to do with her mother's death. Nick feels immediately sympathetic for her, and he's like, so he's trying to explain to her that she's not going to find the answers that she's looking for. It's incredibly hard. He essentially tells her that if it was a Merlin that mesmered her or had something to do with her mother's death, that she would not have that information readily available to see who exactly it was. And anyone that can make a request for that kind of information needs to be Legendborn. And she says, okay, how do I do that? So eventually 2 and 2 are clicking together. She's starting to hear more people come into the lodge because Sarah, when she answered the door, she was like, oh, is Nick your sponsor? And she was like, yeah, sure. She was just trying to get in. But then Bree puts 2 and 2 together and she's like, wait a minute, this is the first week of classes. People are starting to join clubs and things of that nature. People are joining this club, aren't they? And that's why Sarah let me in, because she thinks that you're the person that invited me to join. And he's like, no, we cannot do this. And she's like, absolutely, yeah, you need to sponsor me right now. I'm gonna enter your little rush competition thingy. I'm gonna get the information I need. And he's like, oh my God. Fine. So this, initiation ceremony is essentially a competition for people to try and become squires. Okay, so in chapter 10, we get a lot of like that world building, a lot of this inner mechanics of how things work and specifically the hierarchies in the society. So I'll go through this hierarchy that I kind of like helped me figure it out in my mind. So at the very bottom is vassals and paging families. So vassal and like page line families are essentially, they're all regular people, but they have decided to oath themselves to service in the order. So essentially these are like people in office, so like the administrative support of the college, and they help kind of like keep the order under wraps and let them do whatever they do, cover-ups if they need to. So these little like once born vassal and page lines feed into the actual pages. So these are the people that are competing. They learn a little bit more about the order and what it actually is, and they are actual like fighters, warriors, if you will. So the pages over here are competing right now to become squires, which is slightly above them. And there's a squire for each scion. And the scions are the people that are essentially the descendants of the 13 knights of the Round Table. So this is all like King Arthur, Merlin, all that good stuff. Each page is sponsored by like somebody. So Nick is her sponsor. Then we have Greer, who is another page. I forget who sponsors them. But the only important pages you need to remember is Bree, Greer, Witty. There's a ton of other ones that come up later, but those are like the main 3. So while she is, kind of with Nick and they're talking to people, Bree also meets Felicity, Russ, she meets William. I mean, I guess she kind of knew William already because of that first night or whatever, but he doesn't know that. So she meets William again. Oh, and of course she meets Greer, and they like immediately hit it off with each other. Everyone is fangirling over Nick. They're like, oh my God, Nick's here. And she's like, why is everyone paying attention to you? And he's like, I kind of like renounced my title, because he is Legendborn. And what we later find out, he's the scion to Arthur. So he's the descendant of the literal king. He renounced his title very symbolically. He's like, I reject the society. Bree is subjected to a lot of like passive aggressive, microaggression type things while she's meeting with the other pages and these other families. They all kind of look down on her because also they mention that like usually the pages come from these main families. The people that sponsor them pick from these families. So they not only see Bree as like an outsider, but she's also someone that skipped the line. Again, these people are like affirmative action. But so they lay down some ground rules between Nick and Bree where they're like, okay, nobody can find out this little plan we're hatching. Just you have to act normal. And she's like, okay, cool. So next chapter, chapter 11. Tor ends up taking the pages and she makes a comment. She makes a comment literally staring at Bree. So she's like, I'm so glad all the pages are here. And we have the most diverse page class this year, literally making dead eye contact with Bree. A literal walking microaggression that woman is. Anyway, Bree and the other pages end up going into the forest for their first trial, but Sel ends up interfering because he senses that Bree is there. He's like, she's weird. This is too many coincidences where she's involved with us. She has to be a demon. I'm gonna get her. And Nick is like, you better not. You better step down right now. So they're literally about to fight each other. Meanwhile, Bree literally cannot see because Sel mesmered all the pages so that they were like blind. So she cannot see anything that is happening right now. She's just like, something is gonna hit me and I'm not gonna be here no more. Lo and behold, someone comes out of the shadows and it is none other than Martin Davis, Nick's father. And he's like, Sel, you better stop right now. Martin is like, you are not going to hurt this beautiful young woman that brought my son back to me, because Nick has not seen his father in a very long time. Martin is just like, as long as my son is back in this bullshit, I don't care. Don't touch her. After that encounter, Bree and the other pages all come to this like little clearing where they are making oaths to their sponsors, where they're like, yep, I pledge to work for the order. I'm not going to tell anyone that this order exists. The problem is that Bree knows she is not going to stay with the order. She's literally only doing this so she can have information about her mother. The oath, like as an embodiment, will know that she's lying and will like cast her out. Bree is able to kind of overcome the oath because they say it's essentially like a mesmer. And since she's able to resist the mesmers, she should be able to resist the oath. Nick and her hold hands. Tattoo. While they're swearing to each other, Nick essentially, he like grips her in a way where like, I guess his nails kind of got into her. So that pain response allowed her to like stay grounded and resist the mesmer, like the oath magic business. She was able to like pass off as yes, she took the oath when she really didn't. So while everyone is celebrating because all the pages have now made their oath, Felicity suddenly screams. Everyone's like, what is happening? She speaks in a disembodied voice and then passes out. And everyone's like, oh my God, Felicity, because Felicity has been awakened. What does that mean? That means that her ancestor, one of the members of the round table, as I mentioned, has just taken possession of her. I say possession very loosely. It's not like they're actually like it's them. Each knight has specific attributes that are associated with them. So she is the scion of Lamorak, and Lamorak is number 4 in the succession line. Essentially how it works. So there's 13 scion lines. Cool. So the ones at the bottom are usually awakened semi-frequently. You don't think it starts getting serious until the top members, top 7, once they start getting awakened, they're like, okay, something like bad is happening, because they mention in later chapters that the scion of Arthur had not been awakened in over 250 years. What happened 250 years ago? The Revolutionary War. But then while everyone is kind of like, oh my God, Felicity has just been awakened, they are attacked by hellhounds once again. So all the pages are like, okay, we gotta run. So they run back to the lodge, but Bree is kind of like frozen in her spot because she's like super uber afraid. And Nick is like, you need to go. And she's like, okay. So she runs out into the forest, but she doesn't know which way she's going. Nick tries to point her in the right direction. She's struggling. Girl is directionally challenged like myself. So while Bree is running away, she ends up getting captured by a different demon that looks almost human. The way they describe this thing actually made me want to throw up. It was so nasty. So she gets captured by another demon that almost kills her. It ends up dragging her back to that like clearing area where the others are fighting the hellhounds. So the demon is talking to Martin because he's looking for the scion of Arthur. This demon cracks Martin Davis's spine against the back of a tree. This man should have been gone. He also ends up hurting Nick, but Sel swoops in, kills the demon, saves the day. So it's Nick, his dad, and everyone else that was injured in this fight are all back in the infirmary. William is healing everyone up. Everyone is doing fine for the most part. Nick and his dad need some extra time because they were extra injured. Sel is very angry, very super against Bree, and we find out it's because he thinks she's this like mythical demon that can take on human forms. And she's like, I don't know how to convince you I'm not, but Felicity, Russ, William, and Whitty are all with Bree in the infirmary, and they're like, you really don't know shit about shit, huh, girl? And she's like, no, Nick did not tell me anything about the logistics of what's going on with you guys. So William is super nice, ends up taking her to their little basement area, and he shows her this like giant silver slab, which is, think of like from Harry Potter, the wall in the Black family home where it's like all their lines and their family members and it tracks them. It's the same thing here. So it's this giant slab that has the original 13 knights and their scion lines. William, he's the scion of Gawain, who is the healer. He's number, I think, 11. So his scion line gets awakened relatively frequently because, again, he's at the bottom of the list. And she kind of reminisces on the fact that like she probably couldn't track her bloodline for more than like 5 generations back. And they have this since the 6th century. Think about how many generations that is. So Bree also finds on this wall, there's a marble of the King's Mage to Martin Davis when he was in that like scion age. And she sees that like it's all scratched, like there's scratches all around it as if like it was changed in some way. And it's just something she notices, but like important to remember for later. This is going to be a very long video. So William and Bree return them to the infirmary after almost everyone has gone. Sarah ends up taking Bree home, and they have this like conversation where Sarah essentially tells her that she is actually half Venezuelan, but since she passes as white, no one really like gives her anything. Sel actually comes to interrogate Bree, but he's drunk on ether, which I think is a funny concept. It may or may not be a mechanic just so that we as the readers can hear Sel's innermost thoughts while his inhibitions are lowered. And it's not really like for anything else because I've never seen anyone else in the series get drunk on ether. But anyway, that's besides the point. I can have criticisms about books that I love. So Sel comes to interrogate her, but he's like obviously not in a good state, so he can't even really get anything out. Sarah ends up taking him back to the lodge. Alice finds Bree back at the dorms and she's all dirty. She's all messed up. And Alice is so worried because this girl has like cuts, bruises. She's worried. Like, as a good friend, she's worried. Despite being mad at her for like the past 15 chapters, Alice helps Bree like get ready, take a shower. Alice stays with her for a little bit. Bree is like not in a good mental headspace. She ends up like breaking down. Alice gives her some time to be by herself. But while she breaks down, she feels like after Bree is coming out. And while after Bree comes out, she finds mage flame coming from her body. What is mage flame? Let me tell you. So ether is like all around us. Think of like just like the general magical particles that exist in the world. But when it's like brought forth by a Merlin, the mage flame is the manifestation, like a physical manifestation of that. So she feels the mage flame coming from her, but it's red. She's all kinds of freaked out because she's like, what? How am I doing this right now? So next chapter, this is the next day. Bree has taken a shower. She's all good. She's all like feeling a little bit better, if you will. Alice ends up telling Bree's dad that she was out at a frat party. She got drunk. She like came home plastered. And now that she came home very bruised, very injured, he is extremely worried about her, obviously, because, you know, she's also lost her mother and now she's acting like this. He's scared for her. So he ends up setting her up with a campus therapist. She meets this therapist in the Arboretum and they talk about this monument that's at the center of the Arboretum. But it's this table that has like details around the base, which I think is real because I read the like afterward acknowledgments and I think it's real. This table is held up by little mini carved statues of slaves. And it's supposed to be an acknowledgement of the people, unknown, unnamed slave labor that went into building the University of North Carolina campus. She sees like ether coming up from this monument. So she meets the therapist. Her name is Victoria. And Victoria like points out this monument and she says something. Oh, it's called the Unsung Founders Memorial. So it says, my voice is quiet and breathy. What is this? The Unsung Founders Memorial. Carolina's way of acknowledging the enslaved and the servants who built this place. Her voice wavering between pride and disdain. We get this memorial and it's something, I suppose. It was a class gift. Not unimportant, but how can I be at peace when I look down and see that they're still working? Hold on. I don't know why that got me so bad. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm very emotional as a person. Anyway, that was
That was really good. I'm just very emotional as of late. I finished watching Crash Landing on You yesterday and it really like rocked my...
So Victoria asks Bree if she was a wild crafter like her mother, because so her father set her up with Victoria specifically because Victoria is the only like Black therapist on campus, and she went to school at the same time that Bree's mom did. So she was like, oh, maybe she knows my mom. Cool. Like Victoria drops this and Bree's like, am I a what? She has no idea what a wild crafter is. So the next chapter, Bree is talking with Victoria about a special kind of magic. You know, she doesn't really want to tell her too many details because she's like, why didn't your mother tell you this? So she goes a little bit into this specific kind of craft, which like they later call is like root craft, which is kind of opposing like ether and Legendborn kind of magic. They call that bloodcraft. It's specifically sent down through the generations from mothers to daughters, and specifically like in Black families. Bree's like trying to throw out these like Legendborn, like she's throwing out these terms, and Victoria is like very much like, don't bring that nonsense here. That's not this. So Bree essentially finds out that her mom was actually magical and involved in this world in some kind of way. But Victoria doesn't want to tell her too much about it because part of its practice is that it's passed down from the mother to the daughter. So if Bree's mom didn't tell her about it, Victoria feels like that maybe it was for a reason and that it's not her place to necessarily tell Bree about it. So the next chapter, Bree goes back to the lodge for the dinner that is being hosted for all the pages. And Felicity is crazy, crazy powerful because now she has been possessed by her scion. And Russ is a masochist. He's in it because she's like, we're finding out that Lamorak has like a temper. And he's like all kinds of like, yep, he does. And she ends up like, I forget what he says, but he says something that like made her do like a little like playful push. She throws this man into a wall and homeboy is smiling and giggling, kicking his feet. I cannot make this up. That was so funny. So Nick and Bree end up reuniting back at this dinner. They had not talked previous to this, and Nick ends up giving her a hug because he was super worried about her. He's like, I'm really sorry. This is normally not what happens during these little competitions. And they have like a cute little like romantic moment. This is also the chapter where Bree learns about abatement, and abatement is essentially that once a scion, so like a regular person, descendant of the original 13 Knight, gets awakened, their lifetime is like cut. Most of them won't live past 30. So essentially, it's like Attack on Titan rules. Once you turn into a Titan, it's like 7 years. Same thing. So the next chapter, Bree is at the dinner with everyone, and Vaughn is like trying to like push her buttons, trying to really get under her skin, and she ends up calling him out. They become enemies. This dinner is also hosted by the Order of the Rose, I believe is what it's called. So essentially, Nick tells her that back in the day, the women were not allowed to be scions. And she's like, wait, but I thought it was just like whoever got picked. No one has any control. And what they would do, supposedly, theoretically, allegedly, if someone gave birth in the scion lines to a woman, it was either a male scion or it was an abortion. Anyway, the ladies, because they wanted to help out the order, created the Order of the Rose, which now is mainly like symbolic because of course there's female scions now. Essentially do catering. They're the PTA of the round table. At this dinner, Martin Davis announces that they're going to expedite the trials because more of the scions are being awakened. Trial number 1 begins at night. Trial 1, this like competition, they're in a clearing. So they have 3 mannequins. Each page is paired up with someone. They have to get these 3 mannequins from like one side of the football field to the other side. They have to face these little hell boars that Sel creates from ether. So she's paired up with someone that doesn't like her. This is Sydney. Sel threatens her again while she's on her way to this little like competition. And Nick says that because, so Sel is a scion of Merlin. So he is a physical Merlin in the sense that he's like magical, but he's also the descendant of the original Merlin because they're like oath bound to each other. Sel can sense when he's in trouble, and Nick can sense when he's like about to kill someone. So Bree and the other girl go into the arena. Bree is in charge of getting the mannequins. Bree ends up getting cornered by one of these boars, so she grabs one of Sydney's knives and she jumps from a tree and uses like gravity to like get the boar. So they pass, everything's fun. While they're all celebrating, Nick ends up getting attacked by a hell snake, and Sel has to rush forward to like get off of him. Anyway, chapter 24, Bree goes to Nick's room in the lodge to check on him after he gets attacked, and she ends up staying the night. He tells her that he rejected his title because his mother did not approve of the way that they were training him when he was growing up. So she ended up trying to leave with him in the middle of the night. Nick's dad ends up calling the regents. They capture her. Martin's king's mage, Isaac, ends up mesmerizing her so that she forgets she has a son. So they kind of have a heart-to-heart. They have a little sleepover, if you will. Nick and Bree end up walking back to campus the next day and they kiss. He asked if she wanted to before he did it. So the next chapter, Bree agrees. She meets with Victoria, the therapist again, and Victoria agrees to teach her about Root. So they visit the school cemetery and Victoria shows Bree the hundreds and hundreds of unmarked graves, the previous slaves / people that were buried there. And she tells Bree that the way that like root crafters access root, aka ether, they borrow it from their past ancestors. So they'll like make offerings, they'll call upon their ancestors, and they will connect it to them. She mentions that like regular people don't really have an affinity for it, like they can't access it, but that the dead can access it very well. Victoria, her specific line of rootcraft is that she can access memories and she can go on what's called memory walk. So she takes Bree on one of her memory walks. She accesses one of her ancestors. Bree sees that one of Victoria's ancestors was brutally beaten by a white man back in the past. Victoria says that like since it's a memory, they can't like obviously her ancestors can't see them. They can't impact the memory in any way. That's not entirely true. One of Victoria's ancestors in this first memory, Louisa, ends up taking Bree out of this memory and into a further back memory. So they go on this like second, really Inception level stuff. This is going to be a long thing to... Should I do a part 1 and part 2? Pearl, another one of Victoria's ancestors, is giving birth to a baby, but then the baby comes out and everyone's freaking out because the baby has amber eyes. Who else has amber eyes? Sel. So they find out, Bree finds out, that all the Merlins...
Hello, I'm coming to you from the future as I finish editing this video. It was really long, so I actually did decide to make part 1 and part 2. So this is part 1, but part 2 will be coming very, very shortly. So what does Bree find out about the Merlins? You'll have to watch next episode to find out. I've received some critique that my videos are a little too long, so I thought, what better time to implement shortening some videos. So stay tuned, please. That's it.